The Buffalo Sabres, Ottawa Senators, and Vancouver Canucks have been the talk around Elias Pettersson over the last couple of days. We're going to take a look at those rumors here in today's video. If you like this content, want to see more videos like it, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. So, Elias Pettersson has been the topic du jour over the last couple of months, and most recently, over the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of interest around the Vancouver Canucks forward, a lot of drawing interest from teams around the National Hockey League to vie for their opportunity to acquire this star player. Elias Pettersson obviously has a great track record in the National Hockey League. A lot of people see him as a core franchise player for the Vancouver Canucks. Things are not going so well behind the scenes. There seems to be a lot of rumblings about him, JT Miller, and just a lot of drama going on in Vancouver to the point where we could actually see a trade here for Elias Pettersson. And over the last couple of days, we've heard a couple of different teams linked, and according to the fourth period, that's where we're going to start off our rumors here around Elias Pettersson. The Ottawa Senators, Buffalo Sabres, Minnesota Wild, Dallas Stars, Carolina Hurricanes, and the Detroit Red Wings have been linked to Elias Pettersson. So, to start off, we're not going to read too much into this one here from the fourth period, and it's not because it's against the fourth period or anything like that. It's just not really a lot of detail. This isn't something that we're really looking at today too much. It's more just an overview of what teams have kind of reached out just to see what kind of package could be the starting point. And then from that kind of start, that's where you start to see kind of the trade, the base of the trade starting to come together, and we're going to talk about that here as this video goes along. And that's really the meat and potatoes of today's video. So obviously those first two teams are very going to be very important to look at here through this video, because those are the two teams in particular to me that have the assets of players that the Canucks would want in return for a player like Elias Pettersson. And I remember when, probably like 3 weeks ago, the Islanders were linked to potentially getting a guy like Elias Pettersson. And the reality is, for a team like the Islanders, what player are you sending to Vancouver that's going to be any worthy level of young player that the Canucks are going to want in return for Pettersson? It's not going to happen. And that's something that, unless the Islanders were willing to trade like Matt Barzal, which would definitely be interesting because of his connections to Seattle and that whole, West Coast, that Northwestern area in his younger years, definitely would have been interesting to think about. But the Islanders, I don't think, are of any interest in that type of move. It would be something where they want to add Elias Pettersson alongside Barzal, alongside Horvat. It isn't something where they're trading one of their young studs that they already have on the roster to add Elias Pettersson. That's not going to happen. And that's why a lot of the teams in this conversation kind of write themselves out. The Minnesota Wild, kind of a similar thing. Like, I don't know what assets they would really be willing to move out, like a young player. Like, you're not trading Matt Boldy for Pettersson, right? You want to add on top of that. Dallas has a couple of younger players, but are they going to want to move on from Maverick Bourque to get a deal done for Pettersson? No, they probably want Maverick Bourque and Elias Pettersson, right? You get what I'm saying here. So it definitely narrows the pool of what teams could be interested. And that's why Buffalo and Ottawa do make a modicum of sense here, because I think they're willing to move young, active players on their roster to get the deal done. And I think that's what's separating them from a lot of these other teams that we mentioned here earlier in the video. Now, let's get to Elias Pettersson's numbers. So he's played 450 games in the National Hockey League at the making of this video. He's basically a point-per-game player. He's got 443 points in 450 games, just around a point-per-game player. This season, he's got 11 goals, 20 assists, 31 points in 43 games for Pettersson. Now, Pettersson is still young. This is a guy at 26 years old. He's just getting into the prime of his career. He is not done yet. There's definitely a sentiment out there that the ceiling is still higher on Pettersson, even than what he's produced so far. And I think the change of an environment and team, a lot of people feel out there, if he goes to a new team, he's going to probably get closer to the form that we all hoped when he was drafted by the Canucks. And that's kind of continuing the conversation now into, specifically, let's look at Ottawa first, because Ottawa is interesting because of the name that was mentioned in return. Now, the questions around what the value could be for Josh Norris, it's kind of interesting because Josh Norris is the type of player I think as much as it would make sense for Vancouver to want him in return, you know, unless again it comes back to that conversation like what is the perceived value of Norris? Now I think a lot of people really like Josh Norris. But then comes the conversation, well, Josh Norris has had some injury issues in the past. Is that something that maybe deters Vancouver from making that move? Say from another team that's potentially looking at this type of deal as well, right? And you look at where Buffalo and Ottawa are at in the standings. Ottawa's just on the inside of the wild card spot, kind of hanging on for dear life. Buffalo's just on the outside looking in. There's a reason they want to bring in Elias Pettersson because they see that possibility right now of what could be on the table for them if they make this type of trade. And so that's the first thing. So a package involving Josh Norris, and that was from the fourth period. So credit to them for that source. But that's the starting package for Elias Pettersson for the Ottawa Senators. I'm sure Ali Desh would like to hear that. I'd love to know what Senators fans think. What other pieces would you move in a deal for Elias Pettersson? Because I assume the first round pick has to be in there for this year. What we're going to talk about later with that first round pick, I think is going to play a little bit of an implication in this deal as well. So your first round pick and Josh Norris, that's kind of your starting package, I would assume. And then from there, then we get to the point where we talk about Buffalo, because Buffalo, kind of out of nowhere, is all of a sudden throwing some names around. I'm kind of worried. And when Buffalo has built the incredible defense that they've built, why are you taking away from what your strength is to kind of subtract from that to make your forwards better? And you'll get what I'm saying here in a second. So the first little bit of news we heard was, let's get to it here real quick. So this all started again from the fourth period, and it was the Ducks, Canucks, and Jets have been linked to Owen Power and Bowen Byram. Why is Buffalo even considering moving those guys? Those are the backbone of this team right now. Why would you move out your best assets to try and make up for a deficit up front? Very interesting. And then, on top of that, we also heard that there's momentum building between the Sabres and the Canucks involving Elias Pettersson. And that's from Chad D. Demonicus. I apologize if I said your name wrong. Chad D. Demonicus was kind of mentioning that there's some fuel brewing between these two teams. And then David Pagnotta came out and said that the Canucks want Dylan Cousins and Bowen Byram in a package for Elias Pettersson, but they also like Owen Power. So what that's kind of entailing is, well, in our ideal package here, we get Bowen Byram and Dylan Cousins. But if we don't get Bowen Byram, we'll take Owen Power as well in exchange for Bowen Byram in that deal. So there you go. That's kind of the base of what we're seeing for a potential trade here. And I don't really like it for Buffalo. I like the idea of adding Elias Pettersson, but the problem is, right, especially if it's involving Dylan Cousins, you want Elias Pettersson to play with Dylan Cousins. Why do you want to trade Dylan Cousins here? I don't think that's, again, it's adding to your issues. Like you need complementary pieces to play with Elias Pettersson. And by moving out these players, you're not really doing Pettersson, you're kind of doing Pettersson a disservice by making this type of move. So I'm really kind of confused by what Buffalo's thinking here, especially considering all the younger players they have on the team as well. I'm surprised that those names aren't more in the mix. And I understand, right? Like, obviously, Vancouver wants the best package in return they can get. Of course, the starting package is going to be Dylan Cousins and Bowen Byram or Owen Power. But if that ends up being the package, Buffalo, I think, could be in a lot of trouble this summer. In terms of Kevin Adams as GM, I could see that trade backfiring and really hurting his team and really setting the Buffalo Sabres back again. And they really can't afford to do that right now. That's my honest opinion on it. And we heard a couple more things. Like I said, the fourth period was talking about a package with Josh Norris. The Senators are believed to be willing to entertain offers for Power and Bowen Byram. Again, so that's another source. So David Pagnotta, the fourth period, and then, Chad DeDemonicus talking about some, activity between the Canucks and the Sabres. The Canucks have also been linked to Keandre Miller of the New York Rangers. So you wonder if there's something there where maybe if the Canucks in some kind of package get Keandre Miller in exchange for, say, JT Miller, well, maybe that changes the package of what the Canucks are looking in a deal for the Sabres, right? If they get Keandre Miller, are they going to be as stringent on getting Byram and a player like Owen Power, right? It kind of changes that dynamic. But then, if they move on from JT Miller and Elias Pettersson, are they going to be pressing the button more on wanting Dylan Cousins as a center to take over one of their spots up front, right? These are the things you have to be thinking about. So if there's rumors that the Sabres and the Canucks could be looking at a deal here, well, then the Canucks are also linked in other young defensive players. Well, how could that affect how this trade, in terms of mentality, what the Canucks are thinking when they want this package to get done? Because I can guarantee you, whatever they're talking about for JT Miller, they have in the back of their mind, they want a young center in return, at least for one of these trades. Hopefully both, but ideally at least one, and Dylan Cousins would fit that bill. And Dylan Cousins would be a lot closer to home. He's from Whitehorse, Yukon. So there's obviously that in the conversation as well. There's a lot of stuff that's going to be talked about here, and I'm really interested to see where this all ends up. Because if this does end up happening, and we see some kind of package with Bowen Byram and Dylan Cousins going to the Vancouver Canucks in exchange for Pettersson, that's going to be a blockbuster trade. And I don't think that's the only deal we're going to see here over the next couple of weeks. Like I said, especially for the Canucks, Keandre Miller has been linked there with JT Miller. That could be an interesting development that we're kind of keeping an eye on. I wouldn't be surprised if Carolina is still looking to add maybe some depth pieces. I think they're going all in this year. I want to see what happens with Colorado. I think they're still in play to maybe add another top six center that could be available, or just another player to add to that group, right? I've heard things about Nelson. I wouldn't be surprised even if they looked at a guy like Brandon Tanev. There's a couple of interesting things that Colorado could be looking at. The Jets, the Stars have been linked to Seth Jones. This is going to be another busy trade deadline. At least I'm hoping. I'm hoping not all the trades get done before the trade deadline like we saw last year, but it's going to be an interesting deadline for sure. And especially if a guy like Elias Pettersson and JT Miller move out of Vancouver, there's going to be a lot to talk about there, a lot of buzz. And hopefully they hold off these trades as long as possible so we can continue to talk about fun rumors. And like I said, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and staying tuned because things are changing so quickly here. And I just posted a video yesterday about how I think Columbus is a great fit for Elias Pettersson. And then radio silence since then. I have not heard anything about Columbus being tied to Elias Pettersson since then. So is that because they're keeping things tighter to the vest and they don't want that information getting out? Or is it because they're really not talking? There's so many mixed signals with all of this stuff, and that's what makes it so much fun, just kind of talking about this stuff. I'd love to know what you guys think in the comment section down below. What do you guys think of an Elias Pettersson type package? It's going to be really interesting just to see what could potentially be available here for the Vancouver Canucks, because I think if we're talking about now, if it ends up being Cousins and Byram going the other way, well then your first round pick, you don't have to worry about that first round pick, right? But then if Ottawa's willing to not lottery protect their first round pick and Josh Norris, well maybe that ends up being the trade that the Canucks end up going with because they see value in that potential lottery pick, right? Who knows? So let me know what you guys think down below. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys again next time. Peace out.